Hello, hello, everyone. Today is December 8th. This is a enhancement subproject meeting of SIG Architecture. This is a meeting that is recorded and available on the internet. Will be available on the internet later for viewing, so please be mindful of what you say and do. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, and in general, just be awesome people. So we've got a few things on the agenda, but I also see a potentially new face. Do you want to say hi?
Yeah, my name is Jacob. I work on work at AWS, and I don't have a big agenda or anything. Here's something like my video. I just was hoping to check out what's going on and sort of lurk, I suppose.
Yeah, no, cool. We welcome lurking. All right. So, Jeremy, you want to kick it off? Jeremy and Navarun, kick it off with a receipts update.
Yeah, sure. Navarun, do you want to talk about your KEP work so far?
Yep. So I raised the KEP PR like 2 weeks back, like awaiting reviews on things. The implementation history. So the details part is still a bit wonky. Like I was going over the notes in the roadmap documentation and trying to do a mind map of like how that thing will exactly fit into the KEP. I was a bit confused and I wanted some reviews on that part. So one question was like, are we going to do the tooling for 1.1? I think Jeremy dropped the question as well in today's meeting notes. Based on that, I think I feel like we should decide on whether to put all those implementation stuff in the KEP at the current state or not. So that's what like I was bike shedding with my own mind that whether we should do it or not. And I went through all the reviews that were already put by Kirsten, Laurie, and I think someone also put more comments. Sorry, I forgot.
Like Sandor left some.
Sandor, yeah. So I was going through the comments and resolved most of them, which I thought like were sane, just to have more reviews on it. Yeah, that's all on my part right now. Jeremy, you want to add more?
Yeah, I'm reviewing what's there right now since I have a little bit of free time. I think the major question is, you want to ask your question now, Kirsten? So
no, I was just queuing myself up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the chair recognizes Kirsten after I'm done talking. I think that we should get the KEP nailed down and figure out what pieces of it we want to automate, what we want to provide tooling for. Like, because you could step back and think like the whole thing could be done manually for 121. It'd be extra work and it would probably be less ideal. But I think we can identify the minimal set of things. Like people can create the KEP receipt themselves. Like it's a small piece of YAML. That should be something that people can do by hand. I think we can build validation to make sure that it has the things that are necessary. And we can build like a summarization function to build the manifest at the top level of the receipt. And I think those are like to me would be the minimum things we would want for 121. We can go past that too, but I think those would be the two that I would want to see in terms of tooling that we would need in place. I think the rest of it is all nice to have, like making it easier for people to reference a KEP and have it generate the metadata for them, I think is all nice gravy stuff afterwards. But I think one, like nailing down the KEP and getting all the reviews in probably needs to happen soon if we're going to do this for 121, because we're getting towards the end of the year and then 121 is going to start. So I think we should set ourselves a deadline of having reviews done this week and try to incorporate the feedback this week, just so we can have that done and start communicating it, because I think that's going to be the hardest part, is communicating to people so that they know that, hey, this change is coming. You're going to need to do these things differently for 121. And like we obviously communicate that stuff when 121 starts up, but that's going to be at the beginning of the year. And then there's not a whole lot of runway after we start communicating that at the beginning of the year before people have to start doing those things during the enhancements collection process. So I think that's the biggest decision point right now. Are we sure we can do this for 121? Can we get it reviewed? And
I actually have a question about this, because like I was thinking about this yesterday and now like it's like kind of bothering me that we're using a KEP to change the enhancement process, but then we're not following the enhancement process. Like it feels especially because it's like a real change to the process. Like it reminds me of the discussion that we were having about deprecations just last week, where it's like there's this big change that's going to affect a bunch of people, like, and in this case it's people submitting enhancements in like a pretty profound way.
Yeah.
But without very much warning and without necessarily like a lot of testing and instruction about how to really go about doing this in a way that doesn't just throw everything into disarray. And so what I'm wondering is like, one, it kind of sets like a bad example, but then two, I almost feel like, and somebody's going to yell at me, but that's fine. I almost feel like the KEP itself, it's not done, right? The KEP is not done, and it wasn't done in 120. I feel like maybe a goal for this is finish the KEP, have that KEP participate in 120, but have like an alpha criteria for 120. Be like, we have to convey what this new process is going to be. Maybe we select a couple beta testers or beta users, or even just shadow users with the new tool for 120. Like I could open a KEP, I could use the new tool or the new process and tell you how it goes. And so could other people, maybe a SIG chair, maybe just someone who just wants to volunteer. Like there's a couple of authors that I think would probably do it and get that feedback. Along with, and the great part of doing it that way is that the enhancements process is in the first half of the release cycle. So you can get that feedback, incorporate that into whatever's happening. And then you have the whole other back half of the cycle to just start letting people know about this new tool. And then you can do like the beta rollout, which might be, you know, everybody has to use it for X part of the enhancement process. And then the GA could be like, okay, like it's more fully rolled out after we have it for X cycles, blah, 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 blah. Because I just envision, like, the more I think about it, the more I think that it's going to really cause a lot of like drama, especially since it's the first half of the year after vacation, especially since the KEP itself isn't finished and there hasn't been like this idea of it circulated, that like maybe just leveraging the process a little bit better and having people test it out, right? Like could just be like the easier rollout, because I would hate to like roll it out and it just causes so much disarray. People hate it, and then you're just like fighting with people constantly because they're not aware of it. You know, like it was a real challenge to get, like there's a lot of authors and SIGs that we're just bringing into the fold of the enhancement process and really trying to get them to participate. And now we're basically telling them, okay, like you have to do it completely differently now with no warning. And I just think that that's going to cause like a lot of issues when we could potentially leverage the enhancement process, which, and this is a KEP. I mean, that's the other problem is like this was rolled out as a KEP, but I just think leveraging that process to make sure that we get it right might make 121 easier.
So I think that we are leveraging the process by writing a KEP about a KEP. It's essentially one of the few meta KEPs that we have. I don't disagree with some of your points, but I do think that the way we have gotten things done in the past is by enforcement, as opposed to like KEP. People started doing KEPs when KEPs became a requirement for the release process. There was a lot less buy-in before that. When we decided between architecture and release that it was going to be a requirement for the release process, that's when it actually started happening.
Right.
So I think that we do need the requirement, and I think that it can't be a maybe you can, maybe you can't, right? Because that's
no. I agree.
Let me.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I think that allows people the wiggle room that we don't want. I will agree with the point that maybe it's too soon. Maybe it's too soon, and maybe we are not as baked as we want to be. Maybe we say that, like you said, maybe we say that 121, this is a thing that we are going to be turning on for 122. You need to be prepared for it. Here's how you do the thingy, right? And make sure that the KEP is complete. I think that what is there is really great right now. I think going back to your point, Jeremy, the goal for this was always the first iteration of this was going to be a manual manual and that's kind of it. Manual, and then we would do the generation, and then everything else would come afterwards. So I think, you know, what comes out of that is that let's make sure that what's written down right now is de-scoped to note that the first phase of this will be, you have to submit one of these tiny receipts yourself, and we will generate the larger manifest. And then moving forward, as we you know, put together feedback and build that into the tool will get better and better. But you need to give us feedback so that we can make it better. So overall, I agree. I will note that this is a KEP that is out of tree, so it has different rules, and it is also process KEP, so it has different rules than one for something that is landing within Kubernetes.
Yeah, I definitely the reason I added the question, can we get this for 121, is because I have a concern that we're going to run into just calendar and it'll be unpleasant for people, and I definitely don't want to make people unhappy during the early part of the release. I think it's already can be stressful enough, like trying to get those things, like their KEPs themselves merged, and having them adapt to this new thing will probably be a little challenging. And that's, I mean, I think that's what's been on my mind for the last couple of days, like for the same reasons. Like, we didn't communicate the Docker shim thing very well, and people, I mean, it's not the same thing, but you know, it's still communications, and I think people were kind of upset. And then the same thing for like the exec probe thing. It's coming, it's not a big change, but it didn't get communicated to people, and there was some feelings that were not great feelings. So I don't want to end up with not great feelings towards this process by sticking it in like at the end of the year and say, hey, January 4th is here, start doing this thing.
I mean,
well, there's also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, to be honest, I have like 10 of these types of things to like finish reviewing before 121 kicks off. So like, if we say that we want one less of those, I'm absolutely fine with it.
Well, I think that there's also a benefit of knowing that you're going to do it in 122, because then the 121 team can also, towards the, like after the enhancements end, they can also say, hey, just so that you know, like individually to all of the authors as well on the KEPs, like just so you know, in 122 there's going to be a different process, and just like build that, like bake in that awareness, because sometimes like if you have to blast everybody, it's a lot harder, but you can build that sort of like, okay, things are going to change kind of idea into the 121 process. So by the time, you know, the announcement comes and the new rules are in place for 122, there's been this like awareness of it. So it also means that people can't argue as much. There's going to be a little bit less pressure, because I'm more concerned about the release team and the pushback that all of the shadows and all of the individuals might get. And I think that just like giving that extra notification cycle, so that it's like, look, this is the rule now. This is what you have to do. We've let you know for one release. We told you what it was going to be. We spent a little time like tweaking it, making sure it was going to be okay for that, for whatever the scope is for the first rollout is going to be okay. We feel good about it, and we let you know. Like I feel like it's going to be a lot easier to like hold the line, and I think 121 it's going to be harder.
Yeah, I'm completely in agreement. I think it also gives us an opportunity to expand the scope if we really wanted to. If we wanted to focus on making this a tighter tool, we could do that with more time. So if we take 121 as a development cycle and a kind of pre-notice cycle, I think it also gives us an opportunity to set the good example of saying like, this is how we should communicate things in the community. And additionally, it gives the release team, the incoming release team, an opportunity to focus on tightening how we do communications overall, right? And use that as a focus for 121, as opposed to trying to drive receipts.
Absolutely. I think that we'll be able to also coordinate. Whoa, is that my mic? What's wrong with my mic? I think that we'll also be able to like coordinate with, you know, like comms or whoever else we need to communicate with, like maybe Josh Burkus, maybe like just get like build a little bit more awareness of what's going on. I think that like we would really have that opportunity in that 121 cycle. Yeah, I was just thinking about it the other day, and I thought I would just bring it up.
No, thank you for raising it. I think it's smart. It's smart because I think that we constantly deal with perception and kind of like the NPS score of the community, right? So that's a good point. I think we're all in agreement. So let's table it until let's still get it. Let's see if we can push what we've got over the finish line, at least to get the docs down, have it reviewed as a team, and ship that to the wider community for their review. And from there, I think we focus on using 121 as a development cycle instead, right? Cool. Any questions, comments, concerns about this?
I have one question. So in the next release cycle, will we be working on validations as well to be shipped for 1.22?
What?
Like validating the manually generated receipts?
So if we get far enough, then we don't have to do the manual generation.
Okay, fair. Yeah.
I still think we should do the validation because people will still do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we won't turn that on in 121, right? It'll be in progress. We'll work on that during 121.
We'll tighten enforcement as we get better at understanding what needs to go into it.
Okay, so I recorded two things as decisions. We're going to target 122 as the launch of this. 121 will be a development cycle. And then we're going to start with a phased approach in the KEP implementation about manual at first, graduating up to more tooling as we have bandwidth and feedback.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So excited. I think it's exciting.
And thank you for raising the concern, Kirsten.
Oh no, I just know that like the last release actually went pretty well, except for some outliers, and I think it would be great if, like we just build on that. Like we're getting more people to buy in, we're getting SIGs to buy in, and if we can kind of just have the tool as an extension of that, I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah, dig it. And we want this, ultimately we want this to be a positive process, right? People should enjoy KEPs. That has not been the case, on the offset. So, all right. So it looks like I believe Aiden is out, as well as Sushmita. So we will save that note for later, future topics. Let's get that into future topics. Also, I should mention or throw it out to the group, I would like to make this meeting shorter. Moving forward, I think there was a soft mandate a while back to do 25 or 50-minute meetings. I think there's a lot of overlap between people who are here and people who are on the SIG release or release engineering calls immediately beforehand. So that is like back-to-back meetings. Let's give each other a break, I think. So for the new year, we're going to shift these to 50 minutes and get a password, and like also decide like, is this meeting time working for everyone? If it's not, we can assess that. I think we often have people who need to drop from this time. So if it makes more sense to move this meeting, we're happy to toss out some options.
Was that a question right now?
I was like, but also, yeah, I was like, but also tell us if you want that.
I mean, for me, Tuesdays tend to be very busy with meetings, so the time isn't like super great for me. So I'm definitely willing to have a time change.
All right. I will get together a doodle. All right. Cool. All right, next up, we have adding conformance tests to the KEP requirements. This is a hippie hacker status update. Basically what was added in here, and I will share my screen, I guess. Now, I don't have a great understanding of the entire scope of like the conformance tests and how and when they're done and what needs to happen. But we were chatting at the SIG architecture meeting last week, and one of the things that Hippie raised was it would be great to have kind of an idea, like if you look through some of what's written here, it would be great to have an idea of when an API is exposed and the kind of operations and what, essentially what operations we're looking for when that API is doing things, right? Having this as an additional piece of metadata would give us the ability to start to track the way an API changes over time and kind of how it's changing between different milestones. I would argue that maybe this is information that could be stuck in the milestone struct, but standalone is fine too. I'm curious to hear thoughts on what y'all think.
I mean, I think it makes sense to update the KEP in some way. Wait, my mic sucks so much. I'm sorry.
Like, we can hear you better than you think we can.
Okay, well, I think that I turned off my headphones because it's making me crazy. Like, this actually came from like a KEP exception, just as background, a KEP exception that we had, that after it was merged, it was by chance that he happened to be looking and noticed that there was a conformance needed. So I think like just part of the motivation of this is like we can't rely on chance of the right person looking at the PR or at the KEP and then knowing enough to ask whether this needs a conformance test. So like he was able to catch it. I want to say it was Sergey's enhancement, but I don't really remember. To me, the first chance. So from that perspective, yes, we need something from the perspective of is this the right format? I don't really, I don't have like much of an opinion, but we definitely need something more to pick up like required testing in the KEP that makes the author or the SIG more proactive to catch things.
Yeah, I think my first stare at this is because I don't work on API changes in general. My first question here is, it sounds like it's definitely starting to sound like we have different classes of KEPs, right? We have some that are focused on process delivery, right? The triage KEP, the receipts thing that's coming in, the enhanced the KEP 617 one, where they're strictly focused on process. They may be out of tree. They may affect something that is in tree, but the code is not directly in tree, right? Then we've got enhancements that may be in tree, but may not directly affect an API, right? And like, what do we call those? And then you've got the, KEPs like this idea, which would be an API change, right? So maybe it's worthwhile to keep the API specific information outside of any struct that we would use for other KEP types. And then maybe it's also worthwhile taking a crack at defining different KEP types, because I think there is an open issue There's an open issue for do we use KEPs for policy changes, I think, was something that was opened by Aaron, I think, a while back. And the answer is maybe. It really, I think it depends on the SIG, how close it's, how close it is to touching Kubernetes. Like there are lots of, I think, lots of workflow things, a decision tree to kind of step through, right? If you look at it from kind of a cluster lifecycle perspective, right, they have their own KEP process, right, where changes to cluster API don't even land in enhancements, right? So that's an entirely different world, and again, that's something that's out of tree, so we don't necessarily care for it to conform, right? Although it does, it's kind of a one-to-one mapping between their CAPs, CAEP, their cluster API enhancement proposals, and the KEPs themselves, right? So I think like when is an enhancement an enhancement? We have some of this documentation already. What are the different types of enhancement proposals that we might see? Could be an interesting question to tackle in future. And if we want to do something API related, right? How do we provide historical information about it, right? The set of fields is a good example of how to do that. But I think that it also dovetails into the conversation about communication, right? About communication, about standing up receipts, right? Because it all goes back to like, how early can you let me know that something's happening, right? And the answer should be as early as possible. And anything that kind of moves us towards as early as possible is a win, I think. So.
Yeah, I just typed in the chat. I was like, well, like we have KKPRs that say, like API review required, or they're tagged that, but we really need to capture that with a little bit more information in the KEP, because the thing is that like not everybody's looking at the Kubernetes PRs. So unless like the people who know a lot about conformance tests are able to look at KKPRs in real time, we definitely need to capture that somehow to like convey to whoever needs to review it. This might be something that we care about.
Yeah, and I think that it it kind of correlates to the, if you think about like the prod readiness review stuff too, being able to flag that something needs some sort of review is pretty important, and I'm not sure that we have a good mechanism for doing that right now. Further, being able to, I think a harder question is, how do we tie something that's in flight to a KEP? There's no way to do that right now outside of a guarantee or a hope from the author of the PRs that they will either link the KEP in some way or come back and update the implementation history. And there's no way to essentially extract information from the implementation history, assuming it's up to date, to kind of gain some data points on what's happening in a release. So there are lots of potential opportunities for optimization there. Cool. Any thoughts?
I mean, I think that something can be done only because like people who are newer to the KEP process tend to like heavily link all of their PRs to the KEP. And then the people who tend to not link PRs to the KEP are people who should know better and who also have a good feel about whether or not things need API review. So I think that there's a lot of room here to like tighten the entire process. Like new people do whatever you tell them to do, or people who are like they link everything heavily. And so I think that this is very doable.
Yeah. I think what's worthwhile. I don't know how, when, who should be responsible for doing this, but like there is likely, or there is definitely a backlog of keps that are underloved and that don't meet certain criteria, right? Is there something that we can or should be doing on our side to make that more visible to people, right?
Like maybe looking at things that haven't been updated in X period of time, or
Yeah, I think last updated is part of it, but a tricky part of it is also that for something that has content wise hasn't been updated recently, but maybe has been converted from the old format to the new format, right? That's a question of, like, was it actually a content update or was it just conversion, right? And then like there's some link loss to, depending on how you set up the, set up the sim links and yada yada yada. So I think it's worthwhile to maybe look into. Although I won't call it like one of our top line objectives, right?
Well, conversions usually do require content changes because the new template requires more information than the old template. Like, so I would just by default say that any upgrade is going to have a content change. Upgrade, like change of template, is going to have a content change because otherwise the template is going to be incomplete.
So I say that to say that I converted all of the SIG release keps into the new format without content changes, so they are out of date. So it is possible, it is possible, and I know it's done because I have done it. So I went, like, we need an indicator that is not just the yeah, I think we need an indicator that is not just the last updated date for and I think we've also proven that the last updated date, or the field specifically, was not useful because we removed it, right? We decided to depend on the GitHub updates instead. So yeah, work to be done there. I won't say it's the most important work. I think convincing SIGs that it is information they should provide is maybe more important than trying to do it ourselves.
Agree.
Lori, you want to jump in?
Sorry, did you ask for me? Because
are you still in the
yeah, I was making my dinner
thing? Oh, sorry.
I had to stir it.
So TLDR on receipts, we are going to continue forward with refining the KEP.
Mhm.
What we are going to do is hold off on trying to deliver it for 121, use 121 as a development cycle and
Okay.
an opportunity to kind of pre-announce it to the community.
Okay.
And then go full force for 122.
Sounds good. Yeah, I was just coming here to make sure that question got resolved because yeah, thank you. But you don't need to interrupt what you were talking about for me. I can go. But it's nice that you did. Right. I'm gonna go stir my potatoes again. But I'll be back.
So I think we can take a deeper look at this conformance test thing. We should do, everyone who is available, take an opportunity to do a review on that. What else? Any questions about the conformance bit?
I think the API snoop stuff they're doing is giving them a pretty good idea of what hasn't been updated. It doesn't have those things defined. And I don't think there's anything in the KEP that defines that, but I think it gives a good picture of things that would need to be updated if we're going to add this as required stuff. So probably go hand in hand. We can figure out what's the minimum thing we want to add. I think it is worth tracking and adding just so people don't forget. I think looking at when Hippie was showing the dashboard they had, there's a lot of stuff that has a lot of
it's so cool
around. Yeah, it is.
But it's like it is nebulous, to be honest. When you start looking at, especially if you come from the perspective where you don't understand it, and then you have to understand that like where there is and isn't coverage, and kind of like where there isn't coverage is scary, to be honest. So I think, yeah, getting a better understanding of the tool. I would say that another kind of axis of this is we are adding. I think that we need to assess what we are and aren't adding to the metadata. And there should perhaps be a process around when we do and don't add things to the metadata. Because when we do, we essentially say, okay, you have to go do this now, right? Like the metadata is our API, essentially, right? So when we add things, we basically say, like, you got to go do this now. And like any addition or any proposal to add something, it should be considered an API change reviewee type situation. I think that we have some flexibility now that it is a little bit more loosely defined, but I think that we're quickly moving into an area where multiple streams will depend on this being valid and not shifting frequently. So as we do that, especially as the receipts process comes into play, and we're doing metadata validation, that we need to make sure that it's not moving around. Maybe a good example of a change that is required, I think, from my perspective, and but how do we do it effectively, right? So if you look at, let's go to the board. So if you look at what's in progress, and boom, right? So if you look at this PR from Jeremy Morris, we'll see that a few things happened, right? Added an open sections thing to the kept template, and open question section. I think that this is actually something that we want people to answer within the KEP and not within the metadata, right?
Great.
That was kind of my read on it. I do there's something I like about the unresolved bit, because like we can key off of that. But I think for now, it probably makes sense for it to just be in human as opposed to in the YAML. But so thoughts on that first part?
I agree. I think that, I mean, if most of the stuff, if everything in the YAML is super required, I just don't see that open questions section getting updated very often.
Yeah. And I think it's also like contextless, right? The second you move it over into the YAML, it's like, well, it's an open question about what? It's a thing in the KEP, and then you go to the KEP and you're like, well, it probably should have been in the KEP already, right? Like, just give me one place to. So that will be one piece. I think the second interesting part about this PR is checking out what happened around the groups, right? So there's a request, and it essentially, like what I was mentioning was that for a KEP that has participating groups, not all of those groups are necessarily SIGs, right? So I think it's more accurate to call it participating groups as opposed to participating SIGs, right? So this was something that was up on a board, and this became a search and replace, right? So you can see that across, all the KEPs, and an update to the tests, and a update to the YAML validation bits and proposal structs, right? Discord, go away. So
do we really want to be updating though people's KEPs for them? I kind of feel like that's, for me, like iffy territory. Like updating the template, yeah. Updating the tools, yeah. But updating people's like KEPs feels.
I think we should do it. I think if we are going to say that we're making a change, one, if we are making a change that is minimal, I think it's absolutely fine. Like this is a pretty small change. It's just a very small change times all of the caps, right? I think if we're going to make a tiny change like that, then we should not. This is kind of like to the user satisfaction point, where we shouldn't be like, hey, you got this. Like we changed this one little field, and now you have to go update all your caps.
Well, a lot of the caps though that he updated were, I think, in the old format.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I think, if the field was wildly different, I would have different opinions on it. But this is pretty small in the grand scheme. I think we still need to go through the exercise of deciding who updates these things to new formats. Like really, I think this is SIG responsibility. So kind of poking them to do that, moving into 121. But what I wanted to point out here is that if we're looking at the metadata as an API, right, then, if you think about some of the things that we do in Kubernetes for APIs, we kind of like provide some rails for things changing, right? Whether it's, defaulting, conversion, yada, 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 right? So like what I see happening is a set of forbidden fields, right, listed in our KEP validation code, as well as a conversion tool, right? If I'm changing a field from one field to the other, it shouldn't have to be a search and replace, right? I should be able to run a generator based on our tooling to say like old field to new field, spit me out what's supposed to happen as a result, right? And then that becomes a generated commit by itself, right? So that's one. I think like that's one idea I had as I was looking through this KEP. I think it's this PR. I think it's fine to merge outside of fixing this open questions thing. But I would say take a look at this one.
Yeah, that line 179, I think the explanatory note should actually be changed because it says a list of SIGs. Because we just changed participating SIGs. I just noticed that. I looked at this KEP the other day and I didn't notice it.
So drop a review on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think outside of that, we should have the conversation about like converting fields, right? And how often are we willing to do it? How often will we? Won't we? What is the process for doing so, right? Because right now it does seem like a few people come by and they're like, hey, we want to add this thing, and we're like, cool, whatever, like there you go. But eventually it's going to come to a point where we're like, we don't want this to happen as frequently.
Yeah, it might be worth versioning the KEP, because it's harder to check like what with tiny little. It sucks, but I know your face. But with tiny little changes, the problem is that it's really hard to tell what version someone there's the big major version changes, right? Where it's like you're going from the one file to two files. Like I can eyeball that change like pretty easily, but the odds that we're going to change from two files to like three files or to one file again are low. So going forward, it's going to be really hard to like at a glance tell what version of a KEP anybody's on without having to like either create a tool to like scan all of the YAML fields or eyeball it or something. So it might just be worth having like a version field and then collecting a bunch of KEP changes and aggregating them together and then that's what a version is, and then putting them all into a version that starts on X release. Because they kind of trickle in, which is confusing too. Like even to the release team, I think it can be confusing, or enhancements. KEP config. I just created KEP config. Yeah, but even to the shadows and stuff, it's harder for them to know what to look for if the template is changing all the time too. So it's nice to have it like say, this is actually the template for that we're measuring against for this cycle. I just think that it does get a little confusing.
So this is what I was angling at, I didn't want to say versioning out loud because like I like the fact that we're a little loose and able to move faster. But yeah, this is what we're kind of leading to, right? A versioning system for KEPs. And if you notice everything that lands in the enhancements sub-projects, project, some of the things that are milestoned, maybe milestoned as KEPs beta or KEPs GA, right? So like that is to hint at the fact that we're not quite done with the process yet, right? I would say that we're in a beta-ish phase, and maybe it's time to, the same way we would expect of someone else when submitting a KEP to define what their alpha, beta, and GA stages mean, maybe it's time for us to do that as well.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm an author, and lots of authors have multiple KEPs, they own a lot of different KEPs, I would, if you say, hey, like I've added this field and it's important, I would want an easy way to just be able to like look through my KEPs really fast and be like, okay, they're all on version whatever, like I'm fine, or I have to update these two, or something, like just some easy way to tell like what I need to do. Or for
And that kind of goes into that field conversion stuff that I was talking about before, right? Like if we identify, like it goes beyond the offer, right? Like if we identify that a KEP is at version foo, right? Our validation, our conversion tool should be able to run over all KEPs of version foo and make the appropriate conversion, right? So the same thing that Jeremy did here, but as a generated commit, right? So we are over time. But I think we had a really, really dope conversation about lots of new things. So let's keep it going. Let's make sure that we get the receipts kept reviewed. I think we have a little bit more time now, given that we know that we're not doing this until 122. But nonetheless, we have some momentum in discussing it. So let's make sure we don't lose that. Cool. All right, everyone. Catch you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy dinner.
Thanks. Yeah.